Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It is Christmas Day. What am I doing? Well, I do have a mulled wine, so happy days. Merry Christmas, everybody. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof for, indeed, Christmas Day. Let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. And just like any other day, you can find them in the description to this video below. 760 personnel lost is still fairly high. Not the highest we've seen, but pretty significant for the Russians. It's these other categories that I think, show that they've had a bad day at the office for sure. 19 tanks, huge. 31 armoured personnel vehicles, huge. 33 artillery systems, huge. 2 MLRS, not going to be a good day for them if they'd lost 2 of those. That is, well, I guess that's, if my maths is correct, that is probably about average. But 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems is a bit of a challenge, and 2 aircraft. We're going to talk about them in a little while. 32 drones, 2 cruise missiles. Don't know if that refers to last night or the night before. Then 53 vehicles and fuel tanks. That is massive. And 5 pieces of special equipment. So this is very challenging for the Russians. Just, if you're going to lose 19 tanks in a day, goodness gracious me, and 31 armoured personnel vehicles. So again, as I've said in the last few days when we've seen these high figures in these equipment categories, that will show that the Russians are on the attack. It is often the case that the Russians lose more in attacking than in defending, and I think that's no exception there. But losses in all the categories. Now, we heard the other day that a Patriot system, or what is thought is probably a Patriot system, took out 3 Su fighters in one day. And that, well, first of all, the Russians hit back at Kherson, I think. I'm wondering whether the pretty horrific strikes on Kherson with artillery and other sort of... I don't know whether they had missiles and drones attacking Kherson, but certainly Kherson has been hit since that happened. However, there have been no strikes on the Dnipro River area with the FAB 500 aviation bombs, so these guided glide bombs, and that has shown a change in behavior for the Russian VKS as a result of those aircraft being taken down. Well, it got worse for the Russians yesterday, because first we heard that a Su-34 was lost, and then potentially a Su-30 SM, and indeed now that's been confirmed. So, as claimed by the commander of the Air Force of Ukraine, a Russian Su-34 was shot down near Mariupol, or in the Mariupol direction, and then in the Odessa direction there was combat work on the Russian Su-30 in the Black Sea. The initial news was we're studying the information in order to know definitely whether it shot down or not, whether it got back to the airbase or not. Well, as you can see here, initially the Su-34 was deemed as a hit, and then the Su-30 being engaged over the Black Sea was unknown, and then that was eventually confirmed. So congratulations, Ukrainian air defense teams. They made themselves the best Christmas present. So we can see from this map that somewhere in the Mariupol direction, one of the airframes taken down, and the Su-30 SM, that's the Su-34 near Mariupol, and the Su-30 SM somewhere in the northern Black Sea area. Russia has put a pause on Su-34 bombing raids in Ukraine after shooting down 3 planes at once. And that was because initially it was people making observations that there were no airstrikes, and then Natalia Humeniuk announced officially as a spokesperson for the Operational Command South that so far we see that they are in substantial and deep thoughtfulness. They're really studying what it was and how much further dangerous it is. So far we have no record of bombings. It's a huge change, and that will help out the Ukrainians no end in their bridgehead, their attempt to expand that bridgehead across Dnipro River. So, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, according to the BBC, the Russian armed forces have lost more than 200 pilots. And that's the loss. It's not so much the airframes that are a problem, although they are very expensive and they don't have infinite numbers of these. It is a huge loss to lose those airframes. But actually, they generally do have quite a few of them, and they can replace them depending on what the airframe is. But it's those pilots that are much more difficult to replace. So each of them requires at least 6 years of training and more than $3 million put into them to do so. There's a huge loss to the Russian Air Force for that. Now, what was amusing after the initial losses, those 3 losses particularly, from that Patriot, supposedly the Patriot air defense system, is we started hearing the old classic, well, you did that to us, so we've done it back to you, but we're not really going to provide any sort of evidence, or it seems very much like a tit for tat, but more like a tit for tat information war. So the 3 Su-34s were unbearable for the Russians, as the Dead District says, but then the Russian MOD announced that they destroyed a NASAMS air defense system, a Kretal NG launcher as well, and shot down 4 Ukrainian jets. So 3 Su-27s and a Su-24. So that's Russian MOD. Then that got even worse. So then there were claims, like these are proper Russian claims, that there are 6 F-16s shot down. 6. Well, first of all, it was 4 F-16s, then that went up to, I think, 6 F-16s, or it might have been the 4 Sus and then 6 F-16s. You're thinking, really? I mean, do you really believe this? Honestly, guys. Then there was a claim that the Patriot air defense system was also destroyed. And I get criticized by Russian trolls on this channel for not giving the Russian official figures, or not giving the Ukrainian losses as according to Russian sources. And the problem is, those Russian sources are so unbelievable, they lack so much credibility, that it is just fanciful to believe. I mean, their claims are fanciful, and believing them makes you a bit of a gullible fool. 6 F-16s, a Kretal, a NASAMS, and indeed a Patriot system, if you really believe everything they say. Yes, unconfirmed reports that 6 F-16s were shot at the airfield in Odessa. If this is true, and it is true, I love that. If it's true, and it is true, then today, Crest, which is their insulting term for a Ukrainian, will cry bitter tears because even a much hyped F-16 did not help them. Yeah, believe that if you want to. I would be highly dubious. I think those claims are unbelievable, personally, but make that what you will. Now, to add to that, residents of Yeysk in Russia have complained of a strange noise and black smoke near residential buildings. It's unconfirmed at the moment, but local reports do suggest that another military plane has crashed in the area. Some users noted the ambulance had gone to the coast. So it's all going a bit wrong for the Russians, I think, in terms of airframes, and indeed, as mentioned, those trained pilots as well. Right. As we move on, a notorious Russian propagandist, Anton Krasovsky, has been admitted to hospital. It's suspected that he has been poisoned. Krasovsky became outside Russia infamous, or outside Russia, he became infamous for his call to drown and burn Ukrainian children. Now, do you remember when I played that excerpt from Russian Media Monitor, indeed, on Russian state television? Played him saying that, and then it was him. Was it either him who was at the time? I think he was at the time the deputy, I don't know, production manager or something of the state TV station. Then was suspended after there was all this outcry for him saying that, but actually it was fully sanctioned what he said. Anyway, he's ended up being poisoned potentially. I don't know how true that is. I don't know any of the details outside of what you see there and the similar ones that are floating around at the moment in the information spaces. Now, other bits and pieces to add to these losses or potential losses or hits or whatever. Nuclear incident in northern Russia. A fire erupted on the nuclear-powered ice-breaking container ship Sevmoput in the port of Murmansk. It's the largest nuclear power ship in Russia. So that was on fire. There was also a car park where 30 cars burned out in the city of Chita in eastern Russia. And that is another case of Russia on fire. And then we have another case of Russia on fire in St. Petersburg, where a warehouse burned strongly for a couple of hours. The hangar in the Nevsky district supposedly housed building materials. The blaze has now been extinguished. So 3 cases of Russia on fire there. I don't know if any of them are kind of nefarious, have been started due to nefarious reasons, or they're all... could they be insurance jobs? Could they just be careless smoker or mechanical fault or whatever? But anyway, 3 things burning there. Right. Going on to distant strikes. Here we include, or the Ukrainians have included, those 2 airframes on the list of things shot down last night. And we have 28 drones, 2 missiles and 2 fighters taken out of the air. Aircraft missile units of the Air Force also destroyed 2 enemy aircraft, one Su-34 in Donetsk region, which was reported in the evening, and one Su-30SM over the waters of Black Sea, the message states. I don't know the interception rate for those drones, I have to say. So I don't know whether all the drones were shot down or half the drones were shot down or whatever. But nonetheless, a fairly typical at the moment drone wave attack there. So 28 drones. We've seen sort of 20 to the 30s most days or evenings or nights at the moment. In terms of as I mentioned, those 3 jets that were taken down by the Patriot air defense system, as I said, the Russians did hit back. I think in response to that, they killed 5 in Kherson. Kherson was really hit pretty horribly. The idea here is that as Kherson marks the Gregorian calendar Christmas Day and Christmas Eve yesterday, the Russians have sort of opened up and hit harder than they perhaps maybe normally would have. That's a rejection of the Russian calendar, the Russian Orthodox Church calendar for when Christmas is celebrated. The Ukrainians have, as you may have heard, moved to the 25th of December in line with, I guess, the West more so than the East. Anyway, aftermath of yesterday's attack, says Nexta, by the occupiers in Kherson, private houses were completely destroyed and multi-storey houses were damaged. The local hospital was also damaged. 3 dead and 8 wounded is what was reported. So this is, it seems, either indiscriminate bombing or artillery shelling of targeted civilian pieces of infrastructure, like, again, medical centres, hospitals and whatnot, that we've seen routinely in the area. Brackets, war crime. Explosions are heard in temporarily occupied Mariupol. This was reported by the mayor's advisor, Petro Andriushchenko. And there's also been a large-scale fire in Horlivka, and there's quite a lot of footage about this fire. Some claims that it was an oil depot. Other claims that it was maybe a shopping centre, but it might have been a shopping centre next to the oil or something. I don't know. Anyway, there's some big fires in Horlivka yesterday evening. Right. Now that's in occupied Donetsk. Right, now we go on to other bits and pieces. So the Wagner defector that I talked about recently, who's been exposing Russia's he's exposing potentially an awful lot of stuff. It's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say in detail. He's supposedly going to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to report Russian war crimes. So he's a defector who exposes, according to Euromaidan Press here, Russia's Donbass ruse, false flag operations in bombshell interview. Igor Salikov has just arrived in The Hague to testify against Putin. Here's a glimpse of what he may be saying. And indeed, there's a whole host of things that might come out of this. Russian defector commanded the FSB Spetsnaz, so those are special forces in Donbass, disguised as Ukrainian separatists in 2014. So this is an admission of the Little Green Men, the illegal invasion by Russia of the Donbass in 2014. I mean, don't give me any of this NATO encroached bullshit, right? This war was an awful lot of Russia encroaching and Russia getting involved very nefariously in the Ukrainian in Ukraine, in Ukrainian politics, in Ukrainian military matters. They supposedly the LPR, DPR, the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic militias were like striking out for some kind of independence or striking out for Russian rule. No, they were predominantly Russian soldiers brought down from Russia in 2014 onwards and took off their insignias and were in uniforms, speaking Russian but pretending they were Ukrainian. Well, this is an open admission. In fact, Putin has pretty much admitted this now anyway. He says Russians murdered civilians in Donetsk with artillery and blamed Ukrainian forces to collapse the Minsk II peace agreement in 2015. So this is admitting, and there's an affidavit to confirm this, at least to confirm what he says, which is that Russia was involved in false flag operations to undermine the Ukrainians, and they were basically bombing their own civilians. I mean, Ukrainian civilians who are one might assume either pro-Russian or neutral or whatever, but Ukrainian civilians bombing them and blaming that on the Ukrainians themselves. Okay, moving on. This isn't necessarily a piece of news. This is a vox pop, but this amazes me. This kind of stuff. It's the cognitive dissonance reduction in the Russian population. So when you have a core belief, in this case, that Putin is awesome and Russia is awesome, and I'm Russian, and so therefore my identity is mixed up with Russia as a whole. The identity of Russia is merged with the identity of me as a human. And then Putin becomes an extension of that. So Putin is the leader of Russia. I am Russian. I identify as Russian. The identity of Russia is merged with me. So therefore, to some degree, Putin is merged with me. And what happens is you have that core belief. And then when you have evidence against that, you're like, I can't have this dissonance in my mind. So how do I resolve this? How do I make this harmonious? So either I change my belief and let the new data hold, in which case I have a new belief. That's really rare. Humans aren't very good at doing that. We don't change our minds often, especially when it's like a 180 shift going the other way. So it's more likely that, well, what we can do is adapt our beliefs somewhat to the new data, but it's more likely that we adapt the new data to our core belief, or we reject the new data wholly, or we compartmentalize it, bury our head in the sand. There are all sorts of ways that we can reject that information that comes across here. And in this way, it's interesting when you understand those kind of mechanisms and you look at how people react here. So this is someone saying, someone asked this woman, do you think Putin has $1 billion, let's say? Now, this is on the back of knowing that Putin is the richest. Well, we know Putin is the richest man in the world. And that is as a result of kleptocracy. So we see that it comes out beautifully here. So do you think Putin has $1 billion, let's say? And she says, yes. And what about $10 billion? And she goes, yeah. About 300 billion? What do you think if he has 300 billion? So the idea is that he's the richest man in the world. And actually, he's got way more than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. His money is probably a lot more liquid as well, because he supposedly, especially if you listen to people like Bill Browder, he basically did a deal with all the oligarchs to say, look, guys, if you want to kind of run, all these hydrocarbon industries and all these money making enterprises in Russia, and if we're privatizing these, but we're keeping this as an oligarchy, I am the supreme oligarch, right? And so you can do business. And you can extract all that stuff from Russia and you can make all the money you want, but I am having 50% of it. And there's some claims that he takes 50% of the income or the profits or whatever, which is massive. Now, that is just kleptocracy. That is corruption. He is stealing that money, and he's actually stealing that money really from the people of Russia. Let's go on to see what this said, because it explains it really well. How about $300 billion? And the woman says, yes. So you can see already, like, oh, Putin's amazing. He's got $300 billion. What does this say about him? And how do you resolve this? Okay. And in light of this question, how is it possible if his salary is only 8,000? She goes, well, our country is very rich, the richest in the world. And the question back is, you're talking about state money. Where does Putin get it from? And she says, yes, it's the people's money, etc. Sorry, the questioner says, yeah, it's the people's money, etc. Where does he get that money from? Well, I think she might be saying that, sort of questioning herself, because he's a president. He is supposed to have 100 rubles on his account. And then how you reconcile that is, oh, it's cool that he has so much money. I'm happy for him. So, and then, then the video goes on to look at hospitals in the richest country. That's the kind of everything hospital rooms people live in. Outlets don't operate, no lights, says the voiceover, and so on and so forth. But the general point here for me is that cognitive dissonance reduction. So how do we resolve the situation where Putin is the richest man in the world and he is extracting that money from the state, and that money really should come to us? To me, as a Russian person, I should be benefiting from that money. That money should be filtering down, supposedly. We should be having amazing sort of welfare provision and services in this government, because our government is making huge amounts of spondoolies. And so how can this happen? It's just like, how do I resolve this? Oh, it's just cool that he's that rich. And so it's probably a form of burying your head in the sand, where like I'm going to la la la. I'm not going to think that it comes from the state, from us, from the people. La 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 la. It's not kleptocracy. It's just cool. It's cool. He's really rich. In fact, isn't it great that Putin, our leader, is like the richest leader in the world? I'm not going to think where it came from. It just makes us better than anyone else because our leader is richer. And it's just, I mean, goodness me, I could go on and on about the ramifications of Putin's wealth and the kleptocracy and the corruption that is endemic through that society. Anyway, just as we meander to the end here, there is information about an increasing number of Russians refusing to participate in assault operations, in particular in units of the 1st Army Corps. Entire groups of Russian servicemen have begun to surrender, according to a spokesperson, Alexander Stupin. Now, take that with a pinch of salt, but we have seen this an awful lot in the past. Not seen so much talk of this recently as in the last 3 to 4 weeks, but certainly when the Ukrainians were on the attack, there were claims of Russians surrendering and refusing to fight quite a lot. Well, actually, here is a claim from the Ukrainians. It is from the Ukrainian spokesperson. So, as I say, take it with a pinch of salt. Talking about that, and actually that is the last that's the last nugget for you for this video. I'll try and do the military aid and geopolitical video a little bit later. Just have a Merry Christmas, everybody, in the meantime. Eat well, drink well, be merry, be happy, but spare a thought, as I said yesterday, spare a thought for those fighting in the trenches for their freedom, and ultimately, I think, for our democratic ideals, and potentially even, if you're looking into the future, and depending where you are in the world, kind of our freedom in a roundabout way. And if you're in, say, Poland and the Baltics and the Nordic states, possibly even more immediately, your freedom, as Russia is ever more threatening to those nations in their imperialistic intentions. Anyway, take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.